How's it going, everyone? Matt here for GR Weekly on a Friday, breaking down and reviewing the Thursday night football game where Taysom Hill was the leading rusher and passer because football and had a great fantasy day, even though he was terrible. And previewing the remaining games here for Week 13 as I lower the light because it's so bright in my eyes. There we go. That's a little bit better. Matt here for GR Weekly. Make sure to follow me at Methodical. Make sure to follow Gridiron Ratings at Gridiron Rating, no S. Make sure to check out the other shows you also have on the Gridiron Ratings YouTube channel. IDP, we're getting defensive on Tuesdays and Thursdays, which was after my show yesterday because I had a little bit of an impromptu sort of show. Also, show update. Can we no show on Monday as I have finals. It's finals week coming up, so I got to take care of a whole bunch of stuff this weekend and a whole bunch of stuff next week. The Wednesday show should not be affected, but Monday doesn't look like it's going to be going down as I have a bunch of finals and they all aren't open yet. I tried to do them all yesterday and today. Only one of them is open. I am midway through. It is not a timed test, so I'm able to do that. But we're not here to talk about we're here to talk about fantasy football, not about my journalism finals for my semester. So Dallas versus New Orleans. Dallas wins this game 27-17. It feels like it should have been more in some respects. And I'm once again asking for a merciful end to the Thursday night football games. It seems to just be a bad product almost every single week. The turkey games, Thanksgiving is probably the only day I think we should have. Thursday, I understand because they can't coincide with the schedule for the college games, but maybe it's a Friday. Thursday is too soon. The players don't like it. The fans hate it. No one enjoys this. And we get bad games like we had yesterday, right? For the Dallas side, we had that last minute news where Amari Cooper was not going to be fully right for this game, still dealing with COVID issues, was out. He came back and he played just a third of the snaps. Would have liked that news anywhere closer to 7:30 or earlier in the time frame of everything. Breaks just 15 seconds before roster lock. You probably weren't able to make moves. I was able to adjust my ranks just a little bit, but even that, I wasn't able to get to all my teams that had Amari Cooper. So some of the places I still had him in, and I couldn't make any sort of changes off that. It didn't really, did not come through with a good game in this one. I'll tell you this, I do not like, though, that Taysom Hill was the leading passer and rusher in this game last night. This Dallas team, I'm a little worrisome about being a legit Super Bowl contender. Defensively, not as much, but offensively, they are not producing at the level I think they should right now. Dak Prescott, Michael Gallup, Dalton Schultz, Mark Cooper, C. Lamb, Zeke Elliott, and Paul. It seems they got all these guys. They should be doing a little bit better. And I think they're all kind of eating into each other a little bit, especially for the running backs. So Elliott and Pollard is definitely the talk of the town this afternoon in terms of a fantasy standpoint. So from the last three games, because let's talk about Elliott he's banged up. There was a knee contusion. He is just plodding along. He does not seem to have any sort of speed to really get these long runs. And Tony Pollard has looked on paper to be the better player, right? So in terms of rush distance, the last three games, negative to 0 yards carrying the ball 3 times. Ezekiel pick up that sort of yardage. 1 to 3 yards 16 times, 45 8 times, 6 to 10 4 times. Doesn't have any rushes over 10 yards, right? Tony Pollard in those same 3 games, negative to 0 twice, 1 to 3 13, 4 to 5 6 6 plus. Does have rushes of 30 and 50 yards on those in that time frame. 4 times. These numbers are very similar. The receiving numbers are very similar. Around 60 yards for Elliott, 50 for Pollard. If there are one guy, in which people want Pollard to be the one guy, I think it's 2 things. One, yes, Pollard has looked very good at times this season. It looks like if anything ever does happen with Elliott, he would be in a spot to really pick up a big beneficiary of the work for him. In Dallas, it's very loyal to Elliott. They understand, I think, that he is playing hurt. We can see that he is playing hurt. Pollard has not, drastically outdone him, but he's outdone enough where it shows if they can just lean on one guy and just gave it to Pollard, he would be in a much better spot to produce for them from, and possibly a real life standpoint, but especially a fantasy standpoint, because Elliott is not getting done. Now, this was the toughest matchup going into the week of any running back. New Orleans Saints are the best run defense in terms of fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs. So the 50-yard rush that Pollard had, that was an outlier, if anything. Great for him. The safety for the New Orleans Saints is number 43. I can't remember what his name is, but he does not like tackling. There was 2 times yesterday where he just seemed to not want to tackle CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup in that game. But It's tough to say what Dallas looks like completely as an offense, as you do have both Cooper and Elliott dealing with issues. But Elliott, I think they should just rest him. They should just sit him. He's not fully right. And I think the longer they kind of keep pushing this off, could come back to bite them. We've seen other players. Aaron Jones has struggled at points this year, especially last week when I thought he was a surprise start and played much, much worse than A.J. Dillon. It's a simple issue of when you have a running back behind and you're able to effectively just move off from them. The Denver Broncos are doing so this week, but I have some issues with how that whole situation is going down. Teams should be in their right to just go away from their starting running back, even if it seems like a disloyalty sort of standpoint. I think it would be better for the player in a long-term sort of perspective. Going over to the New Orleans Saints. Some people just, I understand when they don't like fantasy and they don't like the numbers that are produced from it. As Taysom Hill's performance, sub 50% completion percentage, 4 interceptions, fails to hit 300 yards passing of 41 attempts. Dak Prescott did so on the other side, but he was in a winning effort. So be a little bit different. It puts up 24 fantasy points in most scoring systems. Just like Hurts, which his rushing is going to artificially make him a better fantasy option than he probably should be. Most likely going to pop up in my top 12 next week. I don't like it. I don't like that he's going to be there and play so poorly because there was plenty of passes. In the first drive, looks like there's going to be one that was going to go the other way. Van Der Esch decided to just not catch it. It does get hit later on for a pick six, but there was multiple times this game where 4 interceptions could have been 8 interceptions. So I'm not very confident in this New Orleans Saints offense. It will be a little bit better though when Alvin Kamara is active. Moving on to the rest of the previews, the games that we intentionally left off our first preview was the New York Giants and Miami game. Specifically because we did not know if Daniel Jones was going to play. And we did not know if the rest of the Funky Bunch, Sterling Shepard, Kadarius Toney, what was it going to look like with those sort of players? I think all 3 are out. Currently, Daniel Jones is confirmed to be out. But it looks like we're going to be without Toney and Shepard in this one. Now, Barkley is going to be the only serviceable option, I think, from this team with Mike Glennon stepping in there. And he's going to drop down. He was in my top 12 prior to this news. Gaskin on the side is now my preferred option of the 2 running backs. The rest of the team are all sits if possible. Galladay really hasn't been doing much with Jones active. Have less confidence with Galladay. It's purely Barkley for this team, and he's just a mid RB2 option. It's going to be a matter of how much they get him involved in the passing game because I'm still not confident in that Giants offensive line getting enough rushing push for him. It's really everyone else. Big old sits for me. Miami. Shout out to Gaskin for having his first double-digit performance of the year last week. And a good spot, I think, to follow up here with another good spot. Miami, I think a good sort of location, get a good time possession, good direct flow of this game in their favor. Tua knocking on the door to the top 12. Prefer Wentz and Cousins, but I think all of them are just right at the end there of the top 12. If you have any of those guys on your waiver wire, let's say you have Russell Wilson as your normal quarterback, I would start Tua Tagovailoa over Russell Wilson as well as Cousins or Wentz. Waddle top 15, been on an absolute tear. Matchup Bradbury is definitely a little bit of a hiccup, but I do lean on the side of him to have a good fantasy day here. Devontae Parker is the interesting one. If he does indeed play in this game, last news I had him when he was active on Wednesday, so we're going to have to look on Sunday. This is a 1 o'clock start, so at least we'll have that information at 11:30 in the morning on the Eastern Coast, at least. There's optimism for the active. If he is, I think he's one of my favorite deep receiver options. 7 target floor in each game he has played this year. Mike Gesicki would also be a good start in this one. Washington football team versus the Las Vegas Raiders. Vegas favored by 2.5 right now, 49.5 point over under. I actually really like Washington in this game to upset. But McKissick will be out for the, and I'm happy there's just not as much stemming issues from that very scary hit that he took on Monday Night Football. Washington just playing absolute keep away right now. So 35 minutes of possession over the last 3 games. They are having a good control of the football. They're using their defense in a more effective way. Just get opposing teams on the back foot. They're running a ton of plays, which leads to very natural production. With Gibson and McLaurin, going to favor both of them as top 10 options. The other 2, though, Curtis Samuel, Logan Thomas, both being active. I had a write-up for fantasypros.com, which you could check through my pinned tweet on Twitter. But I was asked to pick a player outside the top 100 as non-tight end because tight ends are going to be naturally lower down the pecking order for sure. But Logan Thomas and Curtis Samuel, it could have been either of these guys. These are players who we were worried about their health status, but now they're both active. Now, Logan Thomas looked a bit better than Samuel in that game. Samuel only played around 20 snaps, but Samuel was the one I wrote up. So I'm going to say if he's out there on your waiver wire, Antonio Brown, who has been suspended. That's a little bit of news that we did not have from the Wednesday, from yesterday's show. It actually broke when I was on with Front Yard Fantasy on their show yesterday, which you can check out on their YouTube over at Front Yard Fantasy on YouTube. But Antonio Brown, I would drop right now for Curtis Samuel and just hang on him. Now, I do think it's a good spot. I do think if they're going to get him more snap involvement, I think Curtis Samuel is going to be a player who shouldn't be down in the 150 or so that he was on the flex rankings board. This is a player who I wasn't particularly in love with coming into the year, but when you're looking so far down the list and you're talking about players who aren't being artificially pushed up because of an injury situation, I think Curtis Samuel is one who really fits the bill to be in a better sort of spot to push himself a bit further up the rankings board come maybe next week or into the fantasy playoffs for sure. Otherwise, outside of them, Gibson, if they continue to use him in a very massive way like they did in the week prior, now without Jaden McKissick, I think it's going to be a little bit of a better spot for him. Jarrett Patterson is not going to be the backup running back in this game. They are going with another player. I'm going to get his name right now, just in case people are looking towards Patterson as an external option. I don't have him on I'm looking through their ESPN roster right now, and I'm not seeing the name that popped up, so it looks like it might be a practice squad player. But Jarrett Patterson is currently not being listed as the favorite as the backup running back to Antonio Gibson in this game. So I'm looking to see that Gibson would have a good workload coming his way if he especially have that monster sort of workload that he had in the week prior. Talking about that Front Yard Fantasy show as well, we're trying to think of who could possibly be the fifth best running back rest of the season, because Taylor, Mixon, Harris, and Eckler seem to be somewhat confidently the big four right now, and Jonathan Taylor is above the apex for sure, with Dalvin Cook and Swift and Christian McCaffrey all going down in the same week. I have a few teams that have multiple of those guys on them, so it's a bad week for me last week, but I think if Gibson is going to continue to see the workload that he did receive, the only player I'm seeing just a massive sort of spot like that is possibly like Elijah Mitchell. Elijah Mitchell is what we're going to talk about just in a little bit. But I think that might be the next best guy if we're looking to see who can be a player who could be really dynamic on both rushing and receiving. And if Washington can really get past that whole little stinker they've had of 6 or last 7 games having only one pass, more than one passing score, having Thomas and Samuel active makes this a better team. McKissick being out does not help, but it does directly help Gibson, which in this case is the guy we're looking to have a little bit more of a step up than in a few weeks prior. Over on the Vegas side, we're going to be without Darren Waller, which is a big hit for this team, as I have an ice cube in my mouth. Jacobs is the only one I could say is relatively fine for where I was ranking him prior. Hunter Renfrow, I moved down just slightly. I think he's a very safe option. I think he actually gets more under short yardage work. So I'm not going to be saying, he goes from the mid 20s to, 30s or 40s or so at wide receiver. I think he's probably just as good a play as he was prior to this. Jacobs does take a little bit of a hit. Foster Moreau, if you're really looking for a tight end, I moved up to tight end 15, and I think that might be a little bit of a over ranking. So I'm going to have to probably adjust how I think about all these sort of guys. But when I think of how this, I'm going to move Hunter Henry up ahead of him. So he's going to be at least 16. I really just don't like that Buffalo game for a fantasy point. It's going to be a great football game. It's going to be a terrible fantasy game. We do have a question here down the chat. Mike Evans or Javonte Williams at flex with Gordon out? So most people would probably say Mike Evans. Him and Godwin, I think, are going to be the most overranked players almost weekly. But with Javonte Williams, that Kansas City run defense has been somewhat strong. I really like this spot for him. We've seen him be a player who, if you give him just any sort of room to extend carries, he will do so. He is a very just bull you over runner. Javonte Williams really has rocketed up the rankings board. I would prefer him to Mike Evans. It's close enough that if you have a personal preference in this, you don't say particularly the scoring system, but even if it's a PPR sort of situation where Williams does get receptions, there's a little bit more added onto it. I do like Williams because it's a good spot for everyone in Tampa Bay, right? But last week we saw what could happen with the Buccaneers. So if you have Godwin, Gronk, and Fournette with Evans, all four of them, they're not relying on any one of those guys to be their primary offensive measure. At least in Denver, they've made a point of using their running backs very effectively. Now it's just one guy, and the receiving game has been sort of lackluster. I think if there's anyone who can have a focus sort of point for Denver, it is Williams compared to Tampa Bay, where they can possibly score 40 points in this game. You don't know how exactly it's going to be. I'd possibly play both of them. There's currently only 10 running backs that I would prefer to Javonte Williams. There's a chance that Javonte Williams is better than a running back you are currently starting. I prefer Williams. If you could play both, great, but Williams is my preference of the two, and thank you for your question. Back to the Vegas side, though. If the issue I'm going to have with Vegas is actually the positive I had for Washington. If they are going to continually just hold on to the ball as much as they are in extending these drives, they got 35 minutes of possession in each of the last 3 games. That's going to be an issue for Vegas to really have enough offensive production where they're going to get a good amount of drive, equity for them, where they're going to say, yeah, you can have these guys and they're going to accumulate stats. Right now, Vegas, all going to be fine plays. They should not be favored in this game. I would be really looking to say Washington actually pulls this out. I really like what I'm seeing out of them lately. I think this is a team on the upswing for sure. Jacksonville versus the Los Angeles Rams. Man, this is an easy game to talk about. Rams favored by 13, 48-point over-under. For Jacksonville, it's just Robinson, no one else. I don't even have any more notes on them because I don't need to. It's just James Robinson, and even to that point, this is a 4:00 start. I believe he did not play on practice on Friday, so we're going to have to be watching out for this one. I don't love the start to begin with. If he's out, it's no one. Over to the Rams side, you're going to be looking out for if you have James Robinson or Darrell Henderson, I think Sony Michel needs to be picked up right now. As Odell and Henderson being watched here, both in great spots, both in line to be the next best options behind Kupp, who, of course, you're going to start. But if he doesn't go, Sony Michel and Van Jefferson definitely take a step up for me. Michel, I think, in a particularly good spot against this run defense. If I'm leaning currently, if they're in or out, Odell, we did say here that it would be very surprising if he does not go. We did not hear that same sort of level of confidence for Henderson. So right now, I would still be looking to see that Odell is going to be a guy you could put into your flex, maybe a wide receiver 2 spot. Henderson is in a great spot. He's also, I think, been a particularly good player this year. But if he is banged up enough to not be able to go in this week, this is a spot where they can easily turn to Sony Michel. This is a very winnable game for them. This is another one of these very high spreads that the other Rams have had. They've been like these double-digit favorites like 3 or 4 times this year. 4 times they've scored 30 points. Only one game though in the last 6 where they have 400 total yards after 3 of the first 5 games they did so. This is an offense where I do feel like they're going to try and dunk a little bit on the Jaguars if they can. We just got to make sure they get there. Higbee a good start, Stafford a good start. I really don't think I need to tell you to start the Rams against Jacksonville. That they're all in particularly very good spots here. Just make sure to have options. If you have Odell, make sure you have a receiver in the 4:00 slots or later. And Sony Michel, I picked him up in a few spots. A lot of these backup running backs are being rostered the closer we get to the playoffs. Like I said, if Alexander Madison or Jamal Williams was out on waivers, that's supposed to be, something was wrong there. Those guys should have been rostered going into this week. They should not have been the big waiver pickups that you were looking for. But otherwise, all Rams in good spots. Just make sure to check which guys are going to be active or not. Baltimore versus Pittsburgh. Just a few games left here. Baltimore favored by 4.5, 44-point over-under. Back-to-back divisional games for both teams. Awful showing from Pitt last game. Kind of a meh showing from Baltimore. If I'm picking one to bounce back, I think it's Baltimore right now. This Pittsburgh defense is not the same that they've shown in the past. I think we're currently, as a whole, sort of community kind of overrating this Pittsburgh defense, myself included. I thought when I looked at the actual numbers, I was a little surprised to see how bad they were, especially in the run. 20th in yards, 31 in yards per attempt. Outside of Watt, who has 12 and a half sacks in his own, the rest of the team is 18 combined. Possibly would be without Hayward. They are without Hayden. I don't know if they're going to be able to pressure Jackson. I think he's going to be the X factor in this game. He's made a determination in the past. If he goes on has a poor game, poor was a 4 interception showing against Cleveland. This is the sort of spot where I really see him to bounce back in a big way. I do like this passing attack from Baltimore Ravens. I said it time and time again. I'm a big Rashad Bateman fan. Mark Andrews has been one of my favorite tight ends of the season, and Hollywood Brown was a little bit banged up last time. I think he's gonna be good to go. I think they're all fine start, good starts for Brown and Andrews. Fine start for Bateman and Devonta Freeman. Freeman, like I said, this is one of the best run defense you can have. The problem is just run matchups you can have. But Jackson just, he takes so much of what that rushing work actually looks like, especially between the 20s. So if we're going to, say Freeman is a mid RB2 start, I think he has a chance to outproduce what his rankings currently would be, which would be like a low 20 into 30 sort of guy. But I think we're just, again, all collectively ranking these guys too low. I do like this Pittsburgh team to bounce back in a big way. On the Pittsburgh side, Harris and Johnson are just basically, matchup proof for fantasy purposes. 15 touches for Harris is his floor. Johnson, 2 games this season, less than 10 targets. 5 such games for the last 2 years when he plays a full allotment of snaps. They're the top plays on every given snap for Pittsburgh. You know this by now. I don't need to tell you that for sure. Which means we got to get into the tougher guys, Claypool and Freiermuth. Freiermuth coming with the concussion. It looks like he'll be able to go in this game, top 12, but towards the bottom of the top 12 if he does actively play for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Claypool, I don't think he really did himself any favors this week. One was the practice comments he made with his head coach, and that bad hit he dished out at the end of the last game. I don't like those sort of jerky kind of plays that players do when they're getting real beat. It's like when you start friendly firing like in a multiplayer game, and you're just a bad sport about it. Don't like that sort of stuff. Average Claypool finish over the last 5 weeks has been wide receiver 46. Comes in at wide receiver 35 for me. That's where he should probably be ending up in most ranks. He's a mid flex option. I think he's just fine. He's just nowhere near the other tier of the other 2 options. Ben Roethlisberger is a firm sit. San Francisco versus Seattle. San Francisco favored by 3.5, 45.5 point over under. San Fran, no Samuel in this one. We know this by now. Brings down Garoppolo, but the rest of them I feel like were pretty great starts. Mitchell not going to door at top 5 at running back, and Ayuk. I took a stand in the last week as a top 20 receiver. I'm going back to the well now, and Kittle's going to be a top 3 guy. These guys all look really great. Seattle, second best 36 yards per drive allowed to opposing offenses. They're keeping people out of the end zone, though. It's very strange. They're giving up, most yards in the league, but they're not particularly allowing people into the end zone. 16 points allowed, most yards allowed. It's very strange how they let you get down there, but it's a real hard take on the bend but don't break sort of idea, because, man, they let you get all the way to the end zone, and they don't let you in. It's quite strange. I do like all of them. Just a side note on Sermon. I'm a little strange that, why they even made the pick for him. I know he's going to be inactive due to injury in this one, but he was Mitchell. However we got to Mitchell to this point, right? 27 carries in back-to-back games. He getting the bulk of the work. 5 receptions last week for over 30 touches. Mitchell is also another one who we can look at to possibly that 5th guy that we're looking for in those top 5 running backs. It's so strange. This is supposed to be like the supposed depth chart guy, and Mitchell's getting this much work. I really do not know what to make of most of the San Fran team next year. Samuel, Ayuk, and whatever the running backs. It's going to be very hard to figure out where these guys should be going in drafts in 2022. But it's a good thing we got a ton of months to get there, right? Seattle side, I really don't like that the offensive coordinator has to come out and say that they need to get DK Metcalf heavily involved. That's not a week 1 quote. That's a week 13 quote. Cool. I'll believe when I see it. Lockett remains a big play option. They're getting a little more of him involved, but him and Metcalf, they're back-to-back for me as wide receiver 2s near wide receiver 20 or so. I do not love this game for them. I do not love Alex Collins being very unproductive. They felt a need to go out and get Adrian Peterson, who at first we were somewhat excited about. because we're, running back starved, and the Tennessee Titans didn't seem like a total dumpster fire. But now, after seeing what he actually, looked like at 36 years old, that does not really bode well for what we can think about for Alex Collins if they think that guy is worth just having on their team. But as it stands, Collins can be an RB2. The rest of the guys are all just fine. Russell Wilson, I think, is the worst start of the group, not including Jared Alvert, of course. There's just too many good quarterbacks I'm currently ranking over Russell Wilson. Tua Tagovailoa, Carson Wentz, Kirk Cousins. If you have any of those three, Joe Burrow, I would expect Joe Burrow to be rostered though. Any of those guys, I would prefer to rolling out Tua this week if you can do so. And our last game, two games left. Denver versus Kansas City. Kansas City minus 10, 47 over under. Very, very simple game. You start all your Chiefs. Cool. But for the Denver side, yes, we do get the Javonte Williams week. Now, I don't like the way we got to it. I don't like how excited everyone is about Melvin Gordon being hurt. So now they finally get to be right about Javonte Williams in week 13. Congratulations to you guys. The rest of the receivers are all going to be flex options as best. Noah Fant and thrown in with that. But Williams, though, is going to be the real standout for the Denver Broncos. This is a top 12 spot for him. He is my favorite Bronco, and I think he's in line with the Kansas City Chiefs in terms of what I think fantasy production could be. I think he's in a really, really good spot. New England versus Buffalo. Buffalo minus 2.5, 43.5 over under. This is probably the best game in terms of a football standpoint. I think the best fantasy standpoint game this is probably the Chargers and the Bengals this week. But in terms of a real just NFL game, Buffalo versus New England. New England, the hottest team in football. They've won like 6 straight. Buffalo trying to hold on to this grasp they can to try and wrangle away the division from the New England Patriots for the 2nd straight year. This game being in Buffalo does understandably favor them, but a 43.5 win over under is very low for a Buffalo-led offensive game. Diggs and Allen are the only Bills I recommend starting. And for the Patriots, Harris is going to be very hard to get away from. But everyone else in this game, I think the defenses are really going to be the talk of the town. The scoring, I think, is going to be very hard to predict outside of Allen and Diggs doing things. So I would lean towards them. The Buffalo side in this game for the offensive productions, Dawson Knox, Sanders, and Beasley being better options than you have for Kendrick Bourne, Jacoby Myers, Harris, and Hunter Henry. They all just feel very sort of similar kind of guys. Dawson Knox and Hunter Henry, I do like when they're not playing against each other and playing against these tough defenses. But it's a very good defensive game. I think it's going to be a very good NFL game. We're still going to find ways to complain about it because good defense equals poor offense. But, that doesn't necessarily equate. You can just have good defense and just strength on strength, and it's going to be a very good. This could be, a real playoff situation game. These teams need to win this one. I think this is going to be a very interesting game. If this ends up being a very good fantasy game, I would not be very disappointed. We want these players to perform well, but I think this is just be an excellent football game and just a kind of a poor fantasy one for sure. And with that, we're going to get wrapping up. We got in under a half hour, which we're trying to do, which is good for us. Thank you for the people who tuned in. For that, though, this has been Matt for GR Weekly. I'm going to be back on Wednesday because then Monday, no show. I have finals. So I won't be able to stop in to give the review of the week 13. I'm hopeful for good football. I hope we get a good week 14 ahead of us as well. With that, make sure to check out Getting Defensive on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Make sure to check out the slate on the weekend. Make sure to follow us at Gridiron Rating on Twitter and our Gridiron Ratings YouTube channel. Make sure to follow me at Methodical1. Make sure to check out my article contribution over on fantasypros.com. It's my pinned tweet. I'm up there with the big boys for that one. So make sure to check all that stuff out. And with that, we'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.